I apologize for my slightly Hezbollah appearance, but I was told in my recent voyage to Iran that the more scruffy I looked, the more plausible I would appear, and the easier it would be to go to things like Friday prayers. And so it proved. It's a country for the scruffy. It's kind of my kind of Middle East. By going to Iran, a country I'd had a great difficulty getting a visa for many, many years, I think I've become the only person who has, since the year 2000, been on the ground in North Korea, in Iraq, and in Iran. In other words, I may now have a stump speech that I can go around giving. This is my prototype for it, as a matter of fact, why I suggested that we might discuss this famous question of the axis of evil. Well, to Iran. Somewhat different. The regime has outlived, for example, the man whose portrait is indeed everywhere, the Ayatollah Khomeini. He has been dead since 1989. But the regime which displays his picture still goes on. It is still a theocracy built in the image of one man, and on one rather particular interpretation of the rights of Shia clerics to make laws. It is actually a declining regime for that reason, because the generation of mullahs who imposed this revolution and the generation of revolutionary guards who actually imposed it by force is dying and moribund, and it's very clear. I went several times to the weekly Friday prayers that are still held at the university, the annual rally, the weekly rally of the regime. And all the speakers were very elderly and often quite quavering. The snowy bearded, if you like, rather than just white bearded and turbaned. There was a time, obviously, when it was very terrifying to live in Iran. I can tell that because of a friend of mine who runs a bookstore. He's a big, tough guy, heavy set, brilliant intellectual, Kurdish, strong fellow. But every time anyone with a beard came into the store, there was a flinch in his eyes. He would act nervously, and sometimes hide a book under the desk. Or he wasn't all that terrified when I saw him, but he was a man you could tell had lived under a reign of terror. When you've met someone who's been through that, you'll always be able to recognize the symptoms. It must have been very bad. I know this is true also from female friends of mine who were terrified that if they let one strand of hair show under their hijab, they would have acid thrown in their face or perhaps be blinded by a blow from a truncheon, either from a policeman or from an over-enthusiastic civilian. And you can see the fear in people's eyes that goes on from that too, but this isn't really happening anymore. What is happening in Iran is very interesting. Within the carapace of a theocratic state, an almost completely secular society is being created. This is for a ghoulish reason. The Iranian mullahs lost so many young people in the suicide waves that they sent against Saddam Hussein, that the sending of gangs of schoolchildren and teenagers to clear minefields on the Iraqi border. There's not enough room in large parts of Iran to bury the number of people that they killed. Large parts of the country, just one big cemetery. They lost so many young people that they had to pay Iranian mothers incentives. If you would agree to have 3 or more children, you could get quite a lot of subsidy and quite a lot of help from the regime. They tried to breed quickly a new generation, as a consequence of which it worked out all right, but not in the way they expected. As a consequence of which it's estimated more than half the population of the country is under 25, and they all hate the mullahs. So it's what I call the baby boomerang in Iran. And if you want to get a drink, which believe me I did, I found a bootlegger at the airport when I arrived, as a matter of fact. If you want someone to come round to your hotel room or your apartment and bring anything else you might like, any other form of alcohol or drugs or pornography or any other kind of video or publication, you can do that very swiftly. The mullahs are powerless to stop it. They may even, some of them, be profiteering from some of this illegal black market themselves. There is a tradition in Shia Islam, very, very firmly believed in by the devout. It's one of the many ways in which Shia Islam is quite like Roman Catholicism. It has 12 imams. One of them is still alive somewhere. He never died. He's never left the earth. He's never left us. He will come back one day, and then we'll know. We will know that the reign of justice on earth is about to begin. Some people thought Khomeini might be the 12th Imam, but he was too pious a man to claim it. It's very blasphemous to claim it for yourself. And it may not be a Shia, it may not be a Persian, we don't know, but the hidden Imam, they believe, is somewhere. Well, I overheard two taxi drivers discussing, and one of them said, do you think maybe George Bush is the 12th Imam? Now, when things have gone that far, the authority of the mullahs, I think, can be said to have been fairly fatally undermined. These drivers won't stop for anyone with a turban. It's remarkable to see it in the street. These guys just wave and wave, the cabs go straight by, and no one will pick them up. It's very widely said, it was very widely said to me, that they wished that there would be an American military intervention. It was said to me most memorably by someone I know slightly, Hossein Khomeini, the grandson of the Ayatollah Khomeini, the only living male Khomeini, in his home in Qum. He said to me, we wish that there would be an intervention to remove the theocracy. You ask, well, why should Sayyid Hossein Khomeini want to remove theocracy? He's a mullah. It's because he's a genuinely believing and devout Shia person, and a great admirer of Grand Ayatollah Sistani of Najaf in Iraq, where he spent a good deal of time lately. And he believes that if it goes on this way, his religion will be discredited, and that the Shia cause will be disfigured and defamed and discredited by performing an dictatorship. And he's right. It's led to the mass production of atheism among young Iranians. I slightly hope it goes on a few more years so the job gets really thoroughly done before it falls, which it will. If we were able to establish an ordinary timeline for ourselves, we would say, I think, that within 10 years the generation of the dictatorship will die out and will somehow be replaced. It will be an organic, internal, endogenous process of self-transformation of Iran. Everyone has a satellite dish. Almost everyone has a relative outside the country. People travel. They all get the news. They don't bother with the official propaganda at all. And they're ready to vote. And when they do vote, they always vote against the theocracy. It's just that there's a reserve government, a secret state within the state that does not actually allow them to take power. But unfortunately, again, there is another timeline that we can't overlook, which is the surreptitious acquisition of weapons of mass destruction and the sponsorship overseas of religious gangsterism. And it's not possible, I think, to allow ourselves with any insouciance to say, well, let's have another 10 years of that as well, while it gradually wears itself out of existence. So once again, we're confronted with people who are gifted, talented, useful, civilized, people who have been denied all their rights, but who know it, and by a government that tries to stay in power by making threatening gestures towards its neighbors and towards the international community. So all you need to do, if I lower my voice here, okay, I have no right to say any of this, all you need to do is what a woman in a chador said to me in Isfahan. The only one woman I met, actually, in a chador, who hated the regime so much that she said, do you think the Americans could come and only stay for about a week and then get out? And I thought, well, what a brilliant idea. I'll pass it on. You know. Several of the Iranian government have wanted men in Europe and elsewhere. We know the names of the people who sent out these death squads to Berlin and elsewhere. Go arrest them. You're gone, you're nicked. The rest of you are up against the wall. I was asked to confirm that I'd heard from more people than I had not heard from the remark that they would welcome in Iran a foreign, a Western and American intervention to remove the mullocracy. And which I can confirm, yes, that's very commonly said. And I was then asked, well, would that not destroy the emerging democratic opposition there? Would it not compromise it? The answer to that is probably that it would. I mean, there are a lot of people who say they think. Actually, let me step a little further back. I heard that said so often by people that after a bit it stopped delighting me. In other words, in a way, it's a confession of weakness on their part. It's a confession of impotence. It's a sort of resignation. We can't do anything ourselves. There's also something slightly servile about it, and a mentality of that kind, of course, could turn on a dime right away, if there was an invasion, people would, if they got what they wanted, they'd suddenly say, down with the occupation, to show that they could be brave after all, as has happened with quite a number of Iraqis. Now that they can show their courage, they do. It's partly because of the shame they feel at the cowardice and conformism before. And one doesn't want to upset this febrile balance too much. And one does hope to encourage an internal movement. But every time an internal movement has been tried, it's been very brutally put down. So that, given the odds, given the very heavily armed goons with which the regime maintains itself, one is condemning people to a much longer period of servitude, and one is also exposing the international community to a much greater risk of a promiscuous state with weapons of mass destruction. Therefore, I think everyone has to reason it and realize that we're accepting a responsibility either way, and that doing nothing is also a policy. So now, well, Iran is a poor country, and a lot of people are very poor in the outlying parts of it, but it is enormously more developed infrastructurally than Iraq. It's really quite, the roads are excellent, the internal airline flights are very good. The traffic jams in Tehran often go on for 4 days, but that's a sign that most people have a car. As far as I could tell, there's no sectarian or confessional problem in Iran. 92% Shia. There are, even the existing theocracy has reserved seats for Jews and for Christians, who are quite small but significant minorities, mainly Armenian, the Christians, in the Majlis, in the parliament. They're recognized and their rights are, so to speak, at least acknowledged, if not actually observed. There's certainly no dislike for Jews or Christians. It's very dangerous to be a member of the Baha'i faith, because that's post-Islamic, not pre. But other than that, there's nothing of this sort. The Kurds are a very small minority. They're not separatist. There hasn't been any fighting there for some time.